Hello, my name is Craig Latta. I'm an independent consultant, freelancer working from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. My company is called Blackpage Digital. And for, gosh, I guess the last 3 years or so, I've been working with Bert Freudenberg and a bunch of other people on applications of SqueakJS, which is an open Smalltalk VM written entirely in JavaScript that can run Squeak, Pharo, and Kuis. And I've been writing some things with Squeak and Pharo recently. And it's a work in progress. I'm going to be showing a few things I've been doing recently. This is all front-end stuff today, although there is a bunch of stuff that works with Node as well. But for now, this is all running in a web browser's JavaScript runtime. And time is short, so please stop me at any time to ask questions. Because I've noticed this is an all live coded demo, so it's best to ask questions when you see something interesting, because we're probably going to move on and talk about 50 other things before the thing's done. So here on my phone is a web page in the DuckDuckGo browser, which is just a wrapper around WebKit. And it's at caffeine.js.org, and if you want to, you can visit it right now. And this is the entry point there, 2D, which is a single page application version of a Caffeine app. And if you go to 3D, you'll find something interesting that hopefully we'll get to. And so here there are a couple of elements, some summary text about Caffeine, just in a div with some text in it with some really simple styling. And then an HTML5 canvas, which has a fairly recent version of Squeak running in it with Morphic. And so right now, this is an interesting hybrid of Smalltalk and JavaScript happening. The whole open Smalltalk VM is here, running, doing Morphic. So if you have the right magic Bluetooth thingies, you can actually, so this is just a folding Bluetooth keyboard. You can actually, sit around in a cafe and actually get actual work done. And the touch events that are allowing me to zoom here are just JavaScript code that is being run as in a script in the page that's hosting this canvas. So this is an interesting hybrid of Smalltalk and JavaScript working together. I'm not sure why those first few keystrokes were so slow. Don't think I'm doing anything with the network here, but in part 2 of this talk, we'll be on a faster machine, so that might be more interesting. Yeah, and then from the phone, you can handle all the events that your particular web browser is giving you. Like every time I change the orientation of the phone, I'm getting an orientation change event in JavaScript land, which I can handle. Yeah, so now I think I'll switch devices. Wow, okay, sorry about that. That was all macOS thinking about the HDMI monitor switch. So here's Caffeine running in Chrome on a MacBook. And one thing I've wanted to do ever since last year at ESUG, when I presented the lightning talk version of this in just a few minutes, was go through the movie I showed at a slightly slower pace to see what's going on. But for a twist this time, the movie's on Vimeo, but I'll control the movie from Caffeine. So we'll touch on a few things to get there. So here's Caffeine, the normal Morphic IDE, the whole Morphic UI on one canvas, here on this canvas. And then since Squeak can evaluate whatever JavaScript it wants, including providing Smalltalk block closures as callbacks to JavaScript, we can do anything that any other JavaScript front-end framework would do live, including tell this canvas to add a box shadow when the mouse hovers over it, or to add this little tray of window management functions as a child of it, so that we can move it around on the screen. So I've got this little toy window system going here. Now we've had the extreme luxury of pretty much all the JavaScript runtime environments getting much, much faster just in the time since we got the VM to work. But 18 months ago, I was really thinking, what can I do to avoid using this entire Morphic interface on one canvas thing, because the VM wasn't really fast enough to have a snappy Morphic experience for raising windows on top of other ones and figuring out occlusions and doing all of the heavy bit-blit abuse that Morphic usually does. So the first thing I came up with for how to make the UI a little snappier was, well, what if I could open up a Morphic window in its own canvas and not try to do the entire UI in one canvas, and just have that canvas fielding the user input events for that one window and not the whole UI? Would that be any faster? And it turns out it was a lot faster. So here's an example of a Morphic window, which is part of this same Smalltalk instance here. It's just off in its own Morphic world here on its own HTML5 canvas. And this could be potentially interesting. I'm not sure if I would want to actually ship any front-end web platform applications that used the original Morphic, but I think it's interesting, at least for debugging purposes, to know that you can intermingle the original Morphic UI with React or Vue.js or whatever other JS front-end framework you want to use. Okay, so anyway, now I've got this inspector open on a Vimeo player JavaScript object. And I did that by evaluating or interacting with some JavaScript objects from this workspace here. Yeah, hopefully that's readable. Please let me know if anything isn't. So after this page loads the official Vimeo library for manipulating embedded movie player instances, then you can create a Vimeo player object and do things with it. So this is just another frame with a Vimeo movie player going in it. And then you can interact with it the way you would as if it were on any other web page. Yeah, so I made this little 3-minute movie for last year, but it really blows through a lot of things very quickly. That effect there was a CSS transition using 3D. It turns out you can do a whole heck of a lot with CSS, and that's another really good benefit of being able to combine Smalltalk with the web platform. On the phone, I was using CSS to do the 2D zooming of the Squeak UI, and for this movie, I used a presentation framework called Impress.js, which uses a zooming and scaling model, but also 3D transitions, which is novel. So this is another thing that I brought in, an ACE text editor. And on this Impress slide is a Squeak IDE that is projected onto a surface inside of a virtual world using a JavaScript virtual world framework called A-Frame from Mozilla. I'm going to skip through this text. Except to point out that last bit of text at the bottom. So from here on this Squeak inside this VR world, we can evaluate expressions that intermingle Smalltalk and JavaScript to manipulate this VR framework and change the VR world around us. So this last line of code here is going to create a new object in this VR world. It's just going to make a red box. And I'll just wait for it to get to the point where I evaluate the code. Yeah, so now if we move through there, we see this box that we just made. And A-Frame as a VR framework, I think, is quite nice. There are a lot of really nice apps that have been made with it. And that's actually one of the concrete application areas that I personally want to get into, is VR and AR app development. And I think having Smalltalk as a secret weapon here in the JavaScript and later WASM WebAssembly runtime environments will be quite powerful, because usually the development workflow for VR stuff, VR AR stuff in the JavaScript world is the same as it is for every other web application. There's a fantastic live coding environment in every web browser, but you usually don't interact with it much. Most of the JavaScript development workflow is still editing code and files until you think it's going to do roughly the right thing, and then you throw it through this wildly complicated thing, build step usually, involving Webpack or something else really complex, and then you finally run your thing, and then if there's something wrong, sometimes people will go into the built-in browser dev tools, the Chrome dev tools or Safari dev tools or whatever, and poke around a little bit to try and get a little more information about why this problem is happening, but they won't stay there. You can't actually just live there and live code all day like you can with Smalltalk. But with something like this, where you can have an entire IDE that's just off in another iframe or on another canvas somewhere, that has full access to everything you're doing, then I see a great possibility for not having to start your debugging session over again every time you reach some weird bug that took you an hour to find. You won't have to go through that hour-long dance again to get there. You can just fix it and keep on going and find the weird bug that's 2 hours in. And so anyway, I think Smalltalk has always provided this productivity benefit from not having to start your debugging sessions over again, but it's extremely amplified in the VR, AR case, because the interactions you have to do to find your problems are quite exotic, especially when they involve, strange bits of physicality, wearing headsets and other hardware like that. So we've just moved out of there into another Impress.js slide. And this is showing an example of embedding a link that can take you between slides. And here's an example of a free-floating morphic window that's just here on one of the slides. Now, another idea that I pursued for how to get a snappier UI was reusing an entirely different implementation of Morphic, one that was entirely written in JavaScript for another project called Snap from UC Berkeley. It's the Snap itself is a visual block-oriented programming system for teaching coding to kids, rather like the original Scratch. Yeah, but the way it's done is pretty cool. It's using an implementation of Morphic that kind of makes sense to small talkers who have been exposed to Morphic before. And it's really, really snappy, even on my phone from 2 years ago, running web browsers from 2 years ago. So I implemented a Smalltalk class browser using the Morphic.js from Snap. And so now this is an example of taking a web-based Smalltalk completely out of the graphics business. All it's doing is handling model requests, or if I click this class category, which classes are in that category, things like that. So in this example, Smalltalk is spending most of its time just sitting around and waiting for questions like that, and the web browser, in effect, is handling all the graphics. So that turned out to be a quite interesting avenue also. And then the second to last one I'll mention is using wireframes handwritten in HTML and then imbuing life into them by letting a Smalltalk that's running in the web browser know about their structure. And so from the Smalltalk side, you can set up the event handlers, how you want to handle events when various things in your HTML wireframe are clicked. So this is an example of some handwritten HTML that I brought in as an HTML import. And then again, Smalltalk is just waiting for requests about, which method categories should I let you know about if you click on a particular class, or what source code should I show you when you click on a particular method name. And it was extremely snappy. Unfortunately, HTML imports are being deprecated on the web platform in favor of a different way of doing web components. But it's, as an experiment, I think it showed that this sort of approach is very valuable. Also done some work with remote viewing of other systems from a Caffeine app. So this is a view of an entirely different instance of a native Open Smalltalk VM running on a different machine in the cloud, and it's just being displayed in the web browser. And so there are a lot of interesting things you can do when you're using a normal remote viewing app. It knows how to shovel pixels back and forth, but it doesn't really know much about the window systems that are running on either side, or about how code is executed on either side. But if you do it this way, where both sides know that they are Smalltalk, you have all sorts of possibilities for remote behavior. So I have been writing a system based on that idea called Snow Globe. So in this demo, it's just showing that tiny benchmarks is much faster than you would expect from a web browser. I've also done some work integrating JavaScript parsing to convert back and forth between JavaScript and Smalltalk source. And I'm in the middle of getting all of this running with Node.js as well. So it's not just something for inside web browsers, but anywhere Java and eventually WebAssembly can run. So one thing that's useful to have along with that A-frame support that we saw before for the virtual reality stuff is a speech API. Because if you're not doing augmented reality and your eyes are covered by a headset, then it's not so convenient to use a keyboard if you can't see it. So at least on Chrome, and hopefully on more web browsers soon, there's a pretty nice speech-to-text API. So, in this movie, I'm just trying to show many examples of fruitful integrations of Smalltalk with all of the useful JavaScript frameworks that are out there. WebMIDI is another one. And maybe one of the most powerful is you have full access to the remote debugging protocol that your web browser uses. And the number of them has been getting smaller. Firefox is now using the Chrome remote debugging protocol, so there are really only two major ones. The one that Chrome and Firefox use and the one that Safari uses, but Safari will probably use this one as well. So the upshot of that is that you can do anything that the inbuilt browser dev tools can do from Smalltalk, including do any manipulations you want on the other windows and tabs in your web browser, and do anything that any other web browser extension would do. See, I only have a couple minutes left, so I want to move through this movie. This is just an example of showing that from Squeak running in this tab, it can get information about what other tabs there are. And yeah, once again, I want to thank Dan Ingalls and his original team for making Squeak in the first place, and to Bert Freudenberg for making the JavaScript version of the virtual machine. We've had a lot of fun at ESUGs in particular, getting the latest improvements to that VM working with all of the other Smalltalk images related to Squeak with Pharaoh and with Kuis. I also want to thank Elliot Miranda and Chris Thorgumson and Lamb Research for supporting the snow globe part of this. And if we go out of here, we're back into this web page where we were playing it from. And I'll just end by reloading this page to show that it's here. Are there any questions? Over there.
Okay, you dropped the WASM keyword already. I was wondering, are you working on a port or a cross-compilation from the Open Smalltalk VM to WebAssembly? Is that a goal, or are you happy with the JavaScript version?
I am happy with it, but I'm never going to turn down a huge increase in speed, which I think we will get from WebAssembly. I already have it built for WebAssembly, but not using their garbage collection, which they are about to come out with, but haven't yet. I think it's going to be a lot faster than doing garbage collection ourselves. Yeah.
So what I understood is you explored all these different ways of mixing Smalltalk into browser environment. So what is your conclusion? Which one is more mature? Which one is more like ready for maybe production users? And
oh, yeah, thanks for reminding me. I didn't get to the last one, which is building UIs with Vue.js. I think that's the one that I'm actually going to ship applications that lots of people would use on the front end first.
so you will use Vue components, and inside them you will use.
Then they will be able to speak with Smalltalk logic. And even if I only use Smalltalk as a way of prototyping up what I want, and then what I actually ship is all Vue, that would be a big win for, I think. There's a blog post about Vue.js at my blog site, thiscontext.com.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Sure.
At last ESUG, you said the biggest problem for runtime would be the loading time. How is it now? So I saw it loaded okay, like under a minute, but it's still slow. So what's the solution or the progress on that?
Oh, the progress is pretty good. I haven't seriously attacked that problem yet. I did a very trivial reduction in the size of this object memory that I'm using here. I basically haven't done anything clever to make it smaller yet here, but I've done a bunch of previous work about making small object memories before. When I started, I was using a snapshot that was 35 megabytes in size. And the one I just used today was 24. And just from the difference in loading time from that change, I'm very encouraged that when I get to the 500K snapshots that I have sitting around for native Squeak, that it'll be in a good spot. Yeah, I'm trying to get this cable.
Greg, another question.
Yeah.
The last time I played with this one, you had the binding to that already had that you could interact with JavaScript, and you had the callbacks, but mostly it was used to drive the web page. But was there any layer that, for instance, you could connect to WebSockets and call back to the server to do something, for instance, to open Monticello browser and browse something or other?
You have a microphone? Oh, sorry to cut into the time of the next one. Yeah, the Snow Globe app is the best example of using network connectivity to do interesting things. That's doing a ton of it. And also, just at the very beginning of the development, I had to do things like, how am I going to actually keep my work? Because right now, SqueakJS uses a file system that it conjures up out of IndexedDB. But how do you get snapshots out of there? So another thing that I wrote was a way of sending your object memory snapshot files out of that little IndexedDB world to a Node.js server. Yeah, so that's another example of network stuff. I don't think I heard all of your questions, so I should talk to you afterward.